time. It didn't all just happen in one day. I was attacked. Well, I had intruders in my home 5 times over a period of years, not, as I said, not all in one go. And each time that I had an intruder, I was alone at home. And the last time, as I explained to you, came very, very close for comfort. And I remember standing behind that bedroom door, and I was holding a pink, as I explained to you, a pink 4-kilogram dumbbell. I'm the person that saves the ant out of the bath. I'm the person that will save the insect. So can you imagine me swatting another human being with a dumbbell? It just was not part of my vocabulary or my experience at all. I didn't grow up in martial arts. I grew up as a ballerina. I danced 6 days a week. I didn't go to judo. I was not the girl that went to judo or karate, nothing like that. And there I was standing behind the bedroom door, wondering what to do next. And in that moment, I was having a two-way conversation, and part of it, I was actually saying, if I make it out of this alive, I'm going to go and learn how to defend myself. And in fact, I did make it out alive. And the very next day, I made arrangements to go and learn self-defense.
So in that moment, when you were, going through this extreme, I can't even imagine what it must be like to be in that situation, and that actually passed through your mind at that stage.
Yeah. It was
you had some tools to defend yourself.
Yeah. It's that tachypsyche syndrome where everything slows down. And in that moment, I was able to kind of have this coherent conversation with myself in what must have been milliseconds, thinking this is what I need to do. I really had absolutely no idea. And I remember going to my first self-defense lesson. I remember walking up the stairs and feeling very vulnerable, both because I'd had the incident the day before, and secondly, because when I got to the top of the stairs, I was the only female in the class, which didn't make me feel any better either. So it was a very daunting, experience for me. I kind of wanted to turn tail and run straight back down the stairs, but it was too late, And that's where my journey began, very hesitantly, off a base of having been a victim of crime. Subsequent to that, I then, as I told you, I fell in love with what I was doing. I found it immensely empowering. I guess there must have also been a synergy with the dancing. I'd, danced professionally, actually. So for me, moving was a very natural thing to do. This was just moving in a different way. And so as I said to you, I'm just an ordinary person that began this journey. Maybe the only extraordinary thing about it was that I didn't train 1 or 2 hours a week. I trained 36 hours a week. So that was, I went into it boots and all. I'd run a high-performance training center for Olympic level gymnasts and dancers. So I was familiar with high-performance training. So I adopted the same approach with myself, and I went into it like a high-performance athlete would go into something. And that was it. 36 hours a week I spent, for a few years, year in, year out, boxing, MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, shooting, Krav Maga. And that's basically where it all began. And the more I did it, the more I loved it, and the more I felt I knew nothing. And in fact, here am I, today I'm a black belt and all of that. And the more that you travel down this road, the more you feel there is just so much more to learn. So, every day I'm learning from my students, I'm learning from other people. It just never stops.
Can I ask you, did you go for any kind of trauma counseling or any therapy after the attack happened? So this was kind of your therapy.
This was my therapy, yeah. And the interesting thing for me is that, over time, having opened the club and I started off with a handful of students, 4 or 5 students, and then eventually it grew up to 200 students in the club. And I can tell you from my experience of working with people, um, people come in with anger management issues. People come in with depression. People come in with post-traumatic stress disorder. People come in with all sorts of issues. And it just seems to provide for people an amazing outlet, an amazing platform to heal from whatever it is that they are trying to heal from. And they forge friendships that last for years. I've got students who left the club years ago because they immigrated or moved to another country, or they moved to another part of South Africa, and they will not leave our chat group. To this day, they're still part of the chat group. It is something that really has an enormous impact on people, beyond just the obvious of, defending yourself.
Wow, yeah, like you said earlier, it's empowering for people
Yeah,
to take part in that kind of training. How
yeah.
important, as a female in this country now, how important is it to have some sort of skill in defending yourself?
I think it's important for everybody, males and females alike. I have this situation where, as you know, 80% of my clients are actually guys. They're not women, strangely enough. But I have one of two things happen. I either have a guy coming into the club because he's accompanying his girlfriend, and his modus operandi is, I'm going to take her and then I'm going to leave her there, and she's going to live happily ever after and learn self-defense. What often happens is the girlfriend leaves and he ends up staying. And I've said to my students, what was it that changed for you? What caused you to continue, even though that wasn't your objective in the beginning? And it was this: a lot of guys walk around feeling that, and this is spoken with the greatest of respect. I can only just speak from my own personal experience and what my students have told me. But there's this feeling of, I'm a guy, I'm big, and I can defend myself. But being big and strong counts for nothing when you have a 9 mil at your head. It's technique, it's knowing how to get out of that without getting shot. So I think in terms of people in South Africa, the the male component needs to understand that strength is not what saves you at the end of the day. There is so much more to self-defense. And the ladies out there have the attitude of, well, my husband, my boyfriend, my father, my brother, somebody's going to come to my rescue, so I don't have to, learn to defend myself. Generally, there's a perception that self-defense is something that is done by people that are Rambo, in their camo, and they, it's not, the perception is it's not for everybody. And my argument is, I'm the average ordinary person and it has changed my life. All right, I'm doing it full time, but it is for everybody. And it doesn't matter a person's background. It doesn't matter even their fitness level when they begin. Even that doesn't matter when you make a start. Your preconceived ideas of what this is needs to be thrown out of the window. And I think also, if people start participating in some sort of self-defense and they join the right environment where people are supportive, where people are encouraging of one another and spurring one another on, the whole experience takes on a completely different form. After the whole story with sitting behind the bedroom door with a 4 kilogram dumbbell, now fast forward some years, I was walking in a park. It was actually a July. The sun goes down early. It must have been about 6-ish, 6:30, but it was getting dark, and I didn't realize I was the last person in the park. Had a big dog with me. Well, she didn't help much. And I got cornered by two guys in an area where there's either a drop straight into a dam or a 3 meter drop into a parking lot. So take your pick. That's where I was cornered. My dog ran, and there I was faced with the two guys. I carry a knife. And the interesting thing was I still had fear again, but the fear was completely different. This time I had a fear because I knew I could just see the headlines the following day, Krav Maga instructor kills two people in the local park. I mean, that's all we need. Your skill level goes to a different place where you have the ability to defend yourself. And what people don't realize is that with that comes a whole nother dimension of being responsible and being cognizant of the law and handling your skill in a manner that
like a file.
Exactly 100%, exactly the same thing. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. Also, an interesting thing was that people have joined my club. Again, usually the guys will join and they will learn some skills, and then the attitude can be, well, let me pick a fight in a parking lot. I want to test drive my skills. I want to see if they work, And it's 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 actually been an interesting experience for me as a coach to watch those people start to rein themselves in when they start to realize the amount of damage they can do. The desire to go rushing off into the parking lot and pick a fight with someone starts to go away. And in fact, they develop a greater sense of self-control. Their anger, those that have had anger issues, the anger starts to subside. It's a strange, maybe some psychologist someday will explain it to me why it works this way, but that's been the experience, from my point of view.
Is it specifically with guys?
Yeah, I have found that specifically with guys. With ladies, it's interesting as well. I've had students arrive at the club and I say, hello, welcome to the madhouse, and, welcome them in. And I say, what's your name? And they go, my name's, I say, pardon? My name's, and they don't actually, they don't even have the confidence to speak their name. 3-4 months later, they're the ones who are taking new students under their wings and training them. And I'm standing going, what happened to you? It's the most amazing thing to see this, transpire with the ladies in the club. I find the ladies are very, very good with weapons. Put a knife in a woman's hand and you've got, a formidable opponent if she knows how to work with it. The guys tend to still like to be, they work well with weapons, but they also tend to still be, fists and elbows and knees and that sort of thing. So that's really just been the difference. I've noticed that the women tend a lot more towards weapons, as naturally so, as an equalizer. Yeah.
Interesting. So tell us a little bit about Storm Combat. How did all this start for you?
I started off training, as I said to you, my 36 hours a week, and then I started doing all my belt levels, and I went through, from my yellow belt all the way through. Eventually ended up at my black belt, but along the way I realized that I have a passion to share this knowledge with people. So I then became trained as an instructor. And then after that, I ran a club for some years. And then it was round about the beginning of this year that I'd run another organization for some time. And then at the beginning of this year, I launched Storm Combat. And the idea behind Storm Combat was to intensify the system of self-defense. So yes, I absolutely love Krav Maga and I'm passionate about it and I teach it, but I also am passionate about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and also passionate about teaching people how to fight with a weapon. Disarming a weapon, if indeed you even disarm it, if a knife's coming at you, sometimes you'll disarm it, sometimes it's better just to, try and take the guy out and get yourself out. It's not always about, going in to disarm the knife. But if you are armed and someone comes at you and you need to use your weapon, I'm talking specifically now here of a knife, let's just say. You need to be skilled in fighting with that knife. It's different defending a knife coming in to fighting with a knife. And so I decided to put together a system that would incorporate the Krav Maga, intensify the defense and the grappling on the ground, not from the point of view of keeping the person on the ground. I mean, I always say to my guys, you can be, executing a spectacular armbar and the guy's buddy comes and plants a knife in your chest. It's not going to help, being on the ground. Get up off the ground, get out. But
Right. Interesting.
having said that, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does have a lot of really fantastic moves and things that we use. Having said that, I always say to my students, please don't go to your local JITS club and do what we've taught you, because you will be disqualified and kicked off the mats, because we break the rules and we eye gouge and we do all the things you can't do in a competition. So I don't teach sports jiu-jitsu. I teach it just from the point of view of getting up, getting out. And then obviously I teach the Filipino martial arts purely more so from a knife fighting point of view than a defending point of view. Also, I have been trained in South African systems of knife fighting, and I don't represent any particular organization, although I have received training, and I incorporate that as well. But I find that the structure of this Filipino martial arts, I mean, it's used by your special forces, it's used, apparently even Spetsnaz use Filipino martial arts along with their system and everything else. So my argument is, if it's good enough for, special forces and elite military and elite law enforcement, then it's good enough for the average civilian. So I put all three together, and that's how Storm Combat was born.
Well, that's very interesting. How did you develop all of this? I mean, did you go purely from a practicality point of view, violent crime, and how it will happen to someone? Is that how did you approach your?
Yeah. One of the things, Vainant, I'm very much, and my students will tell you this, I'm a stickler for things being realistic. I'm a stickler for things being hardcore, and also I'm 5'2". So it's actually great being 5'2" when you're teaching people, because I say to my guys that are 6'2", 6'3", I'm testing this technique and don't spare the horses. Come at me with everything you've got. I want to see if this technique works, because if it doesn't work, I'm not teaching it to anyone. Because I don't care if you're 5'2" or 6'4", you always assume that your attacker is bigger than you, faster than you, stronger than you, and maybe even worst case scenario, possibly in a particular area, better trained than you. Yeah. So you need to be able to defend in any given, situation. And my argument has always been that you cannot be doing something if it relies on strength. You can be naturally physically strong. What if you got injured? What if you've taken, a bullet? What if you've been stabbed and now you've lost your strength? You can't rely on strength. You need to still be able to prevail based on, simple leverage technique, and also keeping things simple. The other thing is that I've also trained, I've been involved in training SAPS, and also a lot of CPOs, and I've actually had also a couple of private military contractors that I've trained. And so from dealing with this, and also I've been a responder, so from dealing with this kind of thing and sometimes seeing too much on the street, and I get there, after it's happened, often, you see what's going on out there, and at the end of the day, doing a lovely technique that looks great in the dojo, it doesn't go down like that in the street, I do this with my guys. I have something called corridor of death, and I'll take 20 guys. I'll put them in a row, 2 rows of 10 guys and 10 guys, and I'll give them a number 1 to 20. And then I'll say to one guy, okay, you're standing at the top end of the corridor. You've got to walk through this corridor and make it home alive. I've also said to my 20 guys, you can choose whatever weapon you want, or you can be the weapon. And then as the guy's walking down, I'll say 1, 17, 5, and 8. He doesn't know who those people are, and they come at him. And people do the most phenomenal things under pressure. I've had students run towards a gun to disarm it. I'm going, no, you don't do that sort of thing. When you put people under massive pressure, people, their thoughts and the possible, what's the word that I'm looking for? Perhaps the flaws in their training become immediately apparent. And putting people under that sort of pressure is where it's at, because it's not going to go down nicely like you see in a dojo. Everybody disarm the knife on the count of 3. Not going to be like that. So we're very realistic, very try and keep it as real as possible. The other thing that's very interesting to me is this. We'll train students, let's say it's a gun disarm for argument's sake. Fantastic. So they can do it brilliantly in the studio. Take them out into the parking lot, throw them against the boot of the car, throw a few punches, throw a few elbows, and then put a gun in their face. Suddenly all the training's gone out the window. When you are putting someone in a situation that's not in their comfort zone, that is where your real training, that's where the tacky hits the tarmac. Putting someone in a situation, walking down a dark corridor, and someone jumps out behind a concrete pillar and attacks them. They're expecting it because it's part of the class, and yet, all the technique can so easily fly out the window, which is why we do this over and over and over again, putting people under that sort of pressure to, ensure that it becomes, automatic.
So from what I understand, it's a very intense way of training, like putting people under pressure the whole time, get the adrenaline pumping. So that would give you a real good indication of what you're capable of if you get that adrenaline pumping, because that's when that's when ego's out the door.
Completely, yeah. But I think at Storm Combat we're all just such a crazy bunch of people. I mean, everybody's encouraging everybody else. There's no ego. It's just an amazing environment. People are socializing with each other outside of the club, and they, as I say, it's a really friendly environment. But sometimes they'll be busy with something, and I will put a knife in someone's hand, and I'll say to them, I'm going to turn off the lights when I do go up to such and such a person and put the knife against their neck. And that person doesn't know it's going to happen. Then I turn off the lights. You cannot see your hand in front of your nose where we've been training when those lights are off. It's pitch black. And, then it's a case of, put the knife against his neck. Does he react? Does he respond? Can he do this with his eyes shut? Can he do this in the dark? It's that sort of thing. But it sounds all terribly hardcore. A new student who joins, we don't do that to them. We build them up slowly. We build up their confidence. We get them to the point where they're asking for it. And sometimes students will ask to, for example, do Corridor of Death, and I'll say to them, you can do it, but we're going to go lightly. I don't want injuries. That's the thing. I've been on the receiving end in my own training. I've broken so many bones. I've lost my right eye from taking a punch in a ring. So I can't see out of my right eye. I only have a little bit of peripheral vision. And I don't want that sort of thing happening to my students. So safety in terms of my students is extremely important. So when we have someone new, we introduce them slowly and build up their confidence.
How important is confidence in a combat situation? Confidence in your skills, I want to say.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always say to my students is this: there are two things that are extremely important. Obviously, your mindset, but people say mindset. Mindset can mean so many different things. So what exactly do you mean by mindset? Without going into a whole long sort of thing about it, the two things that I think are important for me is this. Number one, someone points a gun at me, someone puts a knife at my throat, immediately I'm going to psychologically want to dominate that person. So there's this immediate immediate psychological going in. You can't half-heartedly defend, then you might as well not defend at all. And the other is, I say to the person, initially, when you initially respond, your level of violence needs to be greater than your attackers. So you can't, it's not Swan Lake. You can't, disarm a knife in a graceful manner. You explode with a pulse of energy and you go for them with everything you've got. After that, once you've got the knife in your hand, then you have to decide what you're going to do with it. If you go overboard and you seriously injure or kill a person when it's not necessary, obviously legally, apart from morally, that's a real issue as well. So, but it's that initial thing of getting the knife from the person, or that, defending yourself from a choke, being thrown on the ground, whatever it might be. So I think it's those two things, really, your level of violence greater than your attacker, and your absolute commitment to psychologically dominating them. There's a lovely Israeli word, and maybe I'm explaining it wrong, or maybe someone's got a better way of explaining it, but for me, I love this word, retzev. And I say to my students, retzev, and they say, what's that? And I say, forward continuous motion, do not stop until the person's not moving anymore. Just retzev, that's it. And that's what you need to do to, get in, neutralize, and get yourself out. So.
Yes. But I like the fact that you're teaching it with such intensity, and putting the pressure cooker on individuals while they need to defend themselves. Because I think that's really gives you the closest thing, I think, to a real life scenario, because you catch them by surprise, and that's kind of where you want to instill is those be ready for anything.
Yeah.
Kind of approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Van, I don't know if you've seen, but I mean, there's so many things out there on YouTube where guys will be ripping apart self-defense instructors, saying, you've never been in a knife fight, so how can you teach knife defense? You've never been on the battlefield, you've never been operational in Iraq, so how can you go and teach self-defense? And my argument is this, you don't necessarily have to be operational on the battlefield to learn a technique, as long as you are keenly aware of a couple of things. All the things that can go wrong with that technique, all the possible ways that your attacker is likely to respond, the mindset of the attacker, the criminal mindset, understanding that the criminal does just not think the way you and I think. So it's getting those things into students to understand, and then, as I say, putting them under the maximum amount of pressure, and the incredible mistakes that can happen when you put people in that corridor of death. Things that students would never, ever dream of doing in class, they will do because, and the wonderful thing is that every time we run that corridor of death, we use it as a learning opportunity. Never to break down a student and say, well, you shouldn't have done this or you shouldn't have done that, but to say, here is the danger of doing what you did here, or here's the danger, here's possibly a better way of approaching it. And also other students contributing, it's not just me, it's having everybody else, there are 20 pairs of eyes there saying, you gave me your back, or, you went for the weapon, you were so busy trying to disarm the knife, why didn't you just take him out and run? You didn't have to disarm the knife. So there's so many, different permutations that can happen.
But it helps because it puts you in different scenarios, and from each scenario, unlike in real life, I don't think you can learn from two situations, because if you didn't die the first time, it probably would have happened the second time. And this gives you a chance to have that realism, learn from it, and then hopefully that sits somewhere in your mind when that occasion comes that you react in the correct way.
Yeah, 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 absolutely, absolutely.
You were saying now that people criticize and say, you haven't been in Iraq, or you haven't had real combat experience, you haven't been stabbed with a knife. But the reality is we live in a war zone at the moment.
Mm.
And as soon as
Yeah,
people start realizing that, then you should have 1,000 students in your classes.
yeah. It's, I think it also is something that I find um, is such an important message to get out to people, is that don't ever think that you can't defend yourself. Don't think that, people need to have 200 years of martial arts experience. And I've got people that are 70 years old in my club who've never done anything. And but let me tell you, they're getting to the point where I don't want to go up against my own students. They are they really are getting good, and it doesn't matter your background. It doesn't matter your circumstance. There are people that live alone. There are people that live on farms. There are people that live in dangerous areas of the city, and the people that commute, that are facing dangers on a regular basis. And I just believe that it's a negative thing just to say to people, oh, you know what, you need to forget it, you need to be military, or forget it, you need to have had 20 years of experience. What we need to do is give people a message of hope and say to them, you can learn, the basics. You can learn enough to just at least be able to try and extricate yourself from a situation. And also to know when not to fight. I say to students, once they know how to fight, I say to them, it's fantastic that you know how to fight. Now I've got to teach you when not to fight, because knowing when not to fight is just as important. Um, you know, I say to my students, all right, so someone's got a gun here and they want your wallet. What's the self-defense move against that? Give them your wallet. That's the answer. It's not about, oh, I know how to defend myself, bring it on. It's about give them your wallet, get home safe. That's the most important thing. It's not about, running around the streets like Rambo, yeah.
Absolutely. Very well said. Ivana, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. This was a very, very interesting conversation, very different one as that I'm used to, but it was of great value. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fernand. Thank you.